You can do the therapy, you can read all of the books on anxiety and still end up back in that anxious place with none of your old tools working anymore. Friends, that's the funk. And if it sounds familiar, then this episode is for you. Welcome to the WTF podcast, friends. My name is Molly Smith, and I'm on a mission equipping a million people with the tools to recognize when they're in the funk, but more importantly, how to pivot out of it. By tuning in today, you've joined me on this mission, and I'm so glad that you are here. My guest today wrote a book on anxiety, telling the story of his decade-long battle with social anxiety, generalized anxiety disorder, and OCD. His second book talked about his experience with depression. This led to his mission to help people take control of their own mental health. And then, not too long ago, everything Brian thought he had figured out about anxiety and depression stopped working. And the answer, when it finally came, showed up in a place that he never expected. Brian is the best-selling author of the Get Out of Your Head book series and a dedicated mental health advocate. Please join me in welcoming Brian Sachetta to the WTF podcast. Hey, Brian.
Hey, Molly, thanks for having me.
I'm so glad that you are here. I think your story is so powerful and there's a really interesting twist. So you guys stay tuned because this story is really, really fascinating and interesting and you're going to totally dig into it. So let's just get started because I know that anxiety and depression, very, very common, especially in American culture. You've been battling social anxiety, generalized anxiety, and OCD back as a teenager. Can you take us back to the beginning and tell us a little bit about how your anxiety showed up?
Yeah, I think it's probably a common form for a lot of people. I think folks will know this as they hear it, right? Which was basically in middle school and in high school. I didn't even have the terms for it, as in, like, I didn't know what anxiety was, and therefore I didn't know that I experienced anxiety. But I
Mhm.
did know that I would have a class presentation looming. I would have a school dance. I would have a track meet or a basketball game, and I would be nervous for days or weeks on end. And
Yeah,
the track meet would be 2 weeks away, and yet I'd be nervous 13 days in advance of it.
sure.
And I remember just day after day being like, you get that relief sometimes where you're like, okay, the
Mhm.
track meet passed or the season ended, and wow, I have some relief now. But I knew it wasn't sustainable. I knew it was like, oh, I'm in a reprieve here. I didn't figure anything out. I just don't have something next on the calendar. So for
Right.
me, in middle school, in high school, it was just those situations where I felt as though I was being evaluated or my skills or talents were being put on display, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
Just those sorts of competitions and whatnot, where I think most of us, we would get nervous in those situations. For me, what I felt like the difference was, again, sitting there and being like, I'm nervous all day, every day for days or weeks in a row or in advance. That didn't feel right to me.
Yeah. So were you like just ruminating on the prospect of running the race or going to the dance or whatever? Were there any physical symptoms?
Yeah, a little bit of both. So definitely some rumination and some sort of like alongside rumination, some sort of visualization of being like, I'm seeing myself at the dance and it's kind of scary because I don't exactly know what I'm supposed to do. And my brain
Right.
doesn't actually believe that I could achieve the things that I want to achieve. And then
Right.
alongside the mental stuff was, the physical of butterflies in the stomach, racing heart, just generally feeling like I remember being in middle school and in high school and being every lunch every day. I was like, I have no appetite because I'm just nervous all the time. I have this
Oh.
lingering anxiety and I would eat, but like it was still just looking back on it, I'm like, that was certainly not healthy.
Okay. Did your parents help you or did they see what you're going through as anxiety? Did anybody pick up on it?
No, and I think that was a challenge, right?
Mm.
I will always say, like, my parents are amazing people, very loving, very kind. We are not doctors. We don't come from this kind of background. And so that made it
Yeah.
harder to be like, I would, at that age, if I had said, hey, dad, like, I think I have anxiety, he might be like, I don't even know what that is.
Yeah.
And it's no slight on him. That's just not his background. That's not his upbringing.
Yeah.
And so it didn't come until later. I will say later in life, but I mean, it wasn't very late. I was going through a lot of anxiety when I went off to college. And when I came back from the first year, like during that summer, I was really in the thick of anxiety and I was becoming kind of irritable. And my mom picked up on it and was like, dude, like, what's going on? And that was kind of the first moment where I the dam really broke open and I
Yeah.
just kind of let it all out. And
Yeah.
from there, it was, more conversations and trying to figure this thing out. I think in that moment, my mom was like very supportive and she was like, we'll find a doctor, we'll find help, we'll talk to people who've been through it before. And I was like 18, I was like an idiot boy. And I was just like, no, we're not going to do that. Like, I'm going to push it down and get past it and whatever. And I was just so resistant to it. And it's just
Yeah.
funny looking back because it's like, you kind of have to do that work at some point, even if you're like, oh, I can push it down and manage it. I mean, in college, I just managed it through drinking. You know what I mean? And I think a lot of us do
Absolutely.
that, right? So looking back, I'm like, that was not necessarily healthy either. Now,
Right.
I think that I fast forward and I'm like, okay, I started to pick up on these things and, I don't really drink all that much anymore, but there was a period like 25, 26, 27 years old where I was wrestling with that, where I was like, I know that I use this as a crutch, but I don't exactly know how to get out of it. And that's a challenge.
Yes. Okay. I can completely relate with that. Just the not understanding the feelings and the emotions and having to process those and choosing to escape, numb, or ignore with whatever. Like I did that with wine for years, for years because I didn't know what to do with what was going on in me. Right. So I think that's very common. Okay, your lived experiences actually became a book series. So I'm super curious how you decided to put your story on the page for the world to read.
Yeah. It started in 2015. I was
Okay.
going through a lot of anxiety. Like, and if we had many episodes and hours to talk, like a
Sure.
lot of, I obviously deal with the social anxiety, but also like dating anxiety and anxiety around intimacy. And so in 2015, I was pursuing this girl that I was interested in. It wasn't going that well, yada, 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 experiencing a lot of anxiety over it. And it was a prolonged saga because, we went on a couple dates and then she backpacked through Europe and then she came back. And so like it extended itself. Whereas like, I kind of look back and I'm like, it would have been nice if she just stuck around. And even if it didn't work out, if it just lasted like 2 weeks and then I could be done with it. But it,
Sure.
it ended up being like a 3 or 4 month thing, which had its frustrations and all of that. Right. And so
Mm.
I just put myself through so much anxiety around that relationship, situation, whatever you want to call it, that I remember just waking up every single day. And, it's challenging, I guess, just as an aside. It's challenging to talk about this stuff sometimes because I'm like, people may listen and be like, dude, yeah, you got anxious about a relationship. We all do. You know what I mean? Like, I don't sit here and say that these
Yeah.
are like uppercase T traumas. It's just
Right.
these were my patterns and these were my vulnerabilities, the things that I didn't know how to deal with. And to a degree, still don't have a full grip on, but I've made some progress on. And so another aside is basically when you're telling these stories and when anybody else is telling them is like the things that get them may not necessarily get you, but that is a pointer as to what that person needs to do, the work that they need to do in their own life. It doesn't necessarily mean, right? Like it's tough when you're comparing because you're like, well, this person gets nervous about class presentations. I don't get nervous about those. Why are they nervous about that? Yet here I am
Right.
trying to get on an airplane and I'm losing my mind. You know what I mean? So
Sure.
I think just a common thread to kind of set the groundwork is like when it comes to anxiety, if you deal with it, like everybody deals with it in different ways and it manifests in different ways. And so, like, our commonality is the fact that we experience that feeling. It may happen over different things, and that's okay. It's nothing to criticize or belittle people over. Anyway,
Right.
aside over. So, going through this relationship, just waking up day after day after day, experiencing so much anxiety around it, right? This person is off in Europe. I'm trying to keep in contact with them, not getting responses all the time, sometimes getting good ones, sometimes getting bad ones, whatever.
Yeah.
And also, like, again, I would prolong this if we had more time, but like, if you open up my first book and you read the first few pages, like, the first story in there is I went off to college. I met this girl that I liked. I had actually 6 months before that in high school, I was seeing this girl that I liked, and I had a panic attack in front of her because one, again, dating anxiety, intimacy anxiety, but also the
Yeah.
relationship was not going very well. So my body was like telling me what was going on, right? Like there's so much
Sure.
uncertainty here. I don't know how to deal with it. So I go off to college and I'm like, well, that was absolutely terrifying. I've never had a panic attack before. I don't even know what a panic attack is. I just know that that was awful. And then I go to college and I'm like, again, kind of the boyish sort of
Sure.
masculinity thing. I was like, we're going to put all that behind us, turn a new page. Again, this is college. It's going to be a good time. And I meet this new girl that I like, and I have a panic attack in front of her, and she does not take it very well. And so, like, if I look at my entire history, I'm like, one, I think I always struggled with intimacy, but then
Mhm.
it's almost like the rich get richer, the poor get poorer kind of thing, where it's like, I didn't have the skills, and therefore I found myself in some situations that brought me more pain and made me even worse with the intimacy. And then I get older and I'm like, I'm back in another one of those situations. And here is my nervous system being like, red freaking alert, dude. Like, this girl is off in Europe and you are so afraid, like, ding, ding, ding. Like, this is the work that you need to be doing. And it might
Yes.
not go the way that you want it to go. Right.
Right.
So, anyway, to finally answer the question is, I put myself through so much misery that summer and also learned a lot where I don't know, my brain does this thing sometimes where like stress, 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 like so much stress. And then I eventually have a bit of a purge. And like it's happened a few times in my life where like it, I can almost relate it to when I did psychedelics is, you know, you go through all this stress and then basically you process it and
Yep.
all this information comes flowing out of you and you're just writing everything down. And so
Yeah.
that kind of happened to me during this 2015 summer with this girl. And basically all the information that I had absorbed over the years, and also like the things that I had learned in real time through firsthand experience, those came pouring out of me. And I was like, holy crap, did I basically just write a
Let's
book
write a
about
book.
this? Yeah. And
Yeah.
not trying to toot my own horn, but that was the process.
Please
Right.
do.
And then from there, I just like looked back and I was like, look, you know, I'm an entrepreneurial, creative person. I like building things and whatnot. And it felt as though everything aligned in the sense that I had this content, I had a drive to put a product out on the marketplace. And most importantly, I had been through enough pain myself to be like, this is
Yes.
so awful. If I can take this information and help people
Mhm.
not go through the same thing that I went through, that would be a very meaningful journey for me. And so that's kind
Yes.
of how it all came together.
That is so cool to be able to just to download all of those experiences and those strategies and tactics that have helped you along the way. That's brilliant. Okay, your books are built on strategies that you've used yourself, right? So when you are connecting with somebody now who's in the thick of it with anxiety or depression, what are the first couple of things that you point them to?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard, right? Because I'm like, I would almost be like, read the book because everything's in there, you know? But
Yeah,
I think a few things, right? Like you know, when you work with a coach or whatever, right? There'll be some sort of like an intake call or an intake form. And so I have to
sure.
figure out where this person is at. And then I need to meet them at that level, right? Like if I just start throwing ideas at them and I don't know who they are, what their upbringing has been like, I might, you know, that's probably not going to land with them. So the first thing is just to figure out, like, lay the groundwork, figure out where that person is coming to me from. And
Sure.
then from there, kind of understanding, like, okay, like, hey, maybe these certain things would help versus these other ones. Now, some common things that I often talk about, right, is like, for example, we tend to think that, and I guess in a way, like I cater to the audience, which is kind of like the high performer, high achiever kind of thing, right? Somebody who is outwardly pretty successful or at
Mhm.
least like has some level of success and yet on the inside really struggles. And
Sure.
you know, obviously, like I guess what I would say is that is kind of me. And so therefore I'm like, let me go find other versions of me to sell this product to or help. But at the same time, right, with the critical, like when I think of somebody who's successful, right, they probably are a critical thinker, somebody who is creative and all that. And the challenge with that critical thinking and that creativity is it leads you to a lot of good places in your career and your job and all of that. And yet,
Right.
like, your mind can coil around you at times, right? And so what I'm
Yeah.
trying to do is sometimes I'm trying to find those folks and say, hey, look, you get rewarded on a daily basis showing up to work and putting on your critical thinking hat. And yet, when it comes to your anxiety, if you apply that same strategy, you are totally screwed. I hate to
Yeah.
say it, but you are. And so, again, to finally answer the question, it's
Sure.
basically like I will sometimes start by saying, you're going down that path, you're using the creativity, you're using the critical thinking skills, trying to quote unquote solve your anxiety. Unfortunately, that is not how this game works. And so
Right.
it often sounds simplistic or a little bit flippant, but like I will start with the body a lot of times, right? I will say, hey, when you find yourself in that state, so number one, the awareness is very important.
Mhm.
Building up that awareness to be like, okay, I'm catching myself being in that state again. Because let's face it, you got to catch yourself at a lower, right? If we're saying anxiety on a scale from 1 to 10, the sooner
Mhm.
you catch it, the easier it is to reverse that. And then from
Mhm.
there is once you are start building that awareness, or even on one instance, one occasion, you find yourself having caught yourself in the anxiety, I then say, okay, start with the body. Don't go to the mind. Don't start spinning the wheels. Get up, go for a walk, do some deep breathing, tap back into your physiology. I'll save the evolutionary psychology bit, but I'd basically be like, your body is wired to get you out of threatening situations. Therefore, even if you are not literally in front of a tiger, you kind of want to act as though you are. You want to send a message to your brain to be like, I'm getting up off the couch and I'm going for a walk. I'm doing what you are telling me to do. Right. And so, therefore, I tap back into that physiology and then eventually I send a calming message back to my brain. It's simplistic. I totally understand that. But it's also like when you see it, you're like, oh,
Oh.
it doesn't have to always be that difficult. That's interesting.
So I call that changing your state. And I learned that from Ed Milet. I don't know if you follow Ed Milet. He's one of my favorite podcasters and influencers out there. And that's one thing when you're in the funk, in an anxious episode or depressive state, changing your state. And that literally means like physically getting up and moving someplace else. It's one of the strategies that I use when I'm get stuck in the funk. So it is simple, but that's the beauty of it, is that it doesn't have to be hard. You literally get up and go do something else, right? Get in touch with the body and the breath and so forth. So I love that. So just a couple of years ago, not too long ago, your anxiety started coming back up again. And so tell us a little bit about the signs that this was emerging again for you.
Yeah, this is where obviously I can go long on these answers. I
Okay.
think on this answer, I could go for hours. So I'm going to try to keep it
Okay. Sure.
shorter if I can. But I
Sure.
guess one of the threads that is kind of bouncing around in my head is the idea that like I felt as though like when I look back on my first book and I'm like, I hit publish on the book and I was 28 when I published it. I think in a way, like, I think I had convinced myself that I figured out anxiety, that I was like, I got this all,
Sure.
under control and I'm good here. Looking back, I'm like, I obviously did not actually have it all under control. I
Okay.
think what I had really done was like I had white knuckled things to a point where I was like, I can get through any of the
Yes.
anxiety. And I
Mhm.
also have come up with tactics for myself that help.
Okay.
Now, what I would also say is a lot of the anxiety in the past was very specific, as in, I'm going to a job interview, I'm going on a date, I'm going skydiving, these things that scare me that are off in the distance.
Sure.
In this new episode, the thing that like blew my mind, and that is, I do not say that in a good way, was I would start getting anxious for seemingly no reason at all. And I'd be like, oh my God, I thought that I had a grip on this thing. I thought that I understood anxiety. And here I am in a relatively new season being like,
Mm.
I wrote the book, and yet do I even know anything?
Okay, well, this season was worse than anything that you dealt with in the past, right?
I am tempted to say yes. The reason why I
Okay.
am a little hesitant is, when the wound is fresh, right? It's like
Yes.
you
Yes.
lose that emotional association when you're like, well, whatever I went through 10 years ago couldn't have been as bad. But like you tend to lose that freshness of the wound. Whereas for the most part, right, like this season that we're talking about, like I think I have it under control today, but it's
Sure.
it's recent, and so like from that lens, I'm like, yeah, that was probably the worst, but like I don't know. When I wrote, when I was going through the depressive battle that led to my second book, that was awful, and it's like if you can't get out of bed and you don't want to live, that's pretty darn bad.
Yeah.
Even though, you look back and you're like, well, it was 8 years ago now, so like you just lose that freshness and it
Yeah.
it just kind of you almost whitewash things a little bit.
Sure. Sure. Were there additional stressors in your life, or was there anything that was just contributing to the everyday things, like the goings on of your life that were weren't like specifically maybe, an upcoming date or doing something very specific.
Yeah, it was all there. And I think the challenge is that sometimes it can be gradual where,
Okay.
there's a couple different phrases that come to mind. And
Okay.
one is, I've been wading through crap for so long that I don't smell it anymore, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
As in you just adapt to it. And the other is kind of like, if folks are familiar with David Foster Wallace, he often says that like things become the water that you swim in, sort of the milieu of your life. And
Mhm.
like a fish who's swimming through water, he doesn't even realize it.
That's right. That's right.
So those stressors were certainly there, but you adapt to them. You find ways to push them down, make sense of them, whatever, justify them. And
Yeah.
then, that is a survival mechanism. But then the challenge becomes you lose the reference point. So then you look around and you're like, I'm completely miserable and I'm totally stressed out. And yeah, like I might be able to point to like one or two things, but I feel like generally speaking, I'm not that stressed out. So
Right.
anyway, to get into some of them, and again, this is another answer that I could spend much time on, but
Mhm.
I'll try to hit the big buckets if that
Sure.
makes sense.
Sure.
So
Absolutely.
yeah, in 2022, I bought a condo and, like this was my home. This was where I lived and this was a big investment in Boston. And, I'm trying to figure out how many details to put in and leave out. But you think about buying, it was a condo, it wasn't a house, right? But like
Yeah.
still my home. And you think about buying a home and the amount of money, like, if you live in the Northeast or anywhere in the US near a city, the real estate is very expensive
Absolutely.
and it's a huge commitment and it's a huge investment. And so I buy this condo and at first I'm having a great time. It's like I live in the city, I'm going out, we got a cool roof deck, things like that. And then within a couple months, the signs start popping up that this is not going to be so good. And
Mhm.
so a few different things. So one, like in the garage of this building, we have they're basically like car elevators. They use them a lot more in New York City. They're, mechanical lifts that basically like make it such that you can store more cars in the garage than you could if it were just a concrete garage with a space next to another space next to another space. So you can
Sure.
kind of stack cars on top of each other and all of that, right? So
Okay.
in theory, seems pretty cool. You're like, wow, we now have way more parking in the building. That allowed the city to give us, the developer, the license to build the building because they don't want more cars on the street and all of that, right?
Sure.
So I remember touring the building and being like, wow, this is fascinating. Like, look at this equipment. Now, it's been 4-ish years and I'm like, goodness gracious, man, you didn't look at that machine and be like, that's a problem. That's going to be a problem. We have to maintain, you know what I mean? All that stuff. So,
Sure.
obviously as you get older, you face more problems, you get a little more conservative, that kind of thing. So
Right.
first stressor there, right, is like these lifts start breaking all the time. So you have an important interview, you have to get to the dentist, you have to go to an outing, whatever, you can't get your car out. And then you come home and the thing's also broken, you can't put your car back in. And so it just became very stressful to live that way where you're like, I just paid how much freaking money for this condo? And also
Mhm.
like people in the building paid 50 grand a spot for like a second parking spot in the garage. And meanwhile, these things, the spaces don't work, the machines don't work. It was bad, right?
Oh my
Fast
gosh.
forward a little bit. So there's retail space in the building. And on the first floor of the building, pretty large retail space. And so it was a new building. Now, when everybody was buying their condos, all the condo docs referred to the retail space saying that, the company Target was going to put a city Target in the building. Like the paperwork had already been signed. They're going to do the build out and all of that. Now,
Fantastic.
would have been great, would have been
Yes.
fantastic.
Oh,
Lo and behold, Target has some meeting and they decide that they are doing away with the city Targets, or at the very least, they're not going to build new ones. They may support the old ones, but no more
okay.
new ones. So they pull out. And obviously, the developer, the owner of the commercial real estate space is like, I got to fill these spaces, So they end
Mhm.
up subdividing it. And the business that signed a lease directly below my apartment, right? Because I'm on the second floor just above the retail space, is a CrossFit gym. And
You
so
can't
they
make
come
this
in.
up. You can't make
It
this
was
up.
absolutely crazy, absolutely crazy. And so I remember getting an email and somebody from, the construction side is like, hey, we're trying to do sound testing. are you going to be home if we do this testing? And I'm like, hell yeah, I'm going to be home because I want to see what's going on. So
Yeah.
one guy is down there throwing a medicine ball on the floor. And as he's doing this, the entire building is shaking because the building is not constructed in a way that supports people
Oh my
slamming medicine
gosh.
balls into the ground, right? And also like the retail space, even though it's on the first floor, the garage is below it. So it's not technically the first floor. It's like the ground floor, if you will, right?
Sure. Sure.
So building shaking. I'm getting text messages. People are like, what the hell's going on in the building? This is bad. The study comes back, the sound study, and they're like, yeah, we don't necessarily think it's going to go great, but there's nothing you can really do about it. We're going to move forward with the CrossFit gym. And I'm like, well, that was one person slamming one medicine ball at 4 p.m. This gym opens at like 4:30 in the morning, and there's going to be
Right.
40 people in every class slamming medicine balls on the floor. So I'm sitting there, I'm like, I just paid $600,000 for a condo, and I'm going to go bankrupt because I'm not going to be able to sleep. Therefore, I'm not going to be able to live here. I'm still going to have to make the payments, or if I try to sell it, it's going to be worth $0, and I am totally screwed, right?
Right.
I guess I could go on and on and on about the different stressors of this building. There were more, but that
Yeah.
was like a massive, massive one where it's like, you're all excited, you buy your home, and it was just hell on earth. And what
Yeah.
I would say, right, to kind of like cap that aspect off was I sit on the board of that building. Me and the rest of the guys on the board, we did a lot of work to just get that building in order. Like, not necessarily make it perfect, but make it such that like the amount of stress is way down. It's a good place to live. The costs are not ballooning every single month or every single year. But I got to a point where I was just like, living in this building, the reminder of everything that I went through is like PTSD. And so I got to get out of here. At the same time, like, I wouldn't leave the place and rent it to somebody if I really felt like I was throwing them at a grenade. So I was
Yes.
like, I've done the work. This is a solid place to live. I just can't do it anymore. And so
Yeah.
I decided to leave, and that did help the stress. But at the same time, right, the challenge being that I'm like, hey, I just got rid of a stressor, and yet I'm still going through the anxiety and
Nice.
the stress and all of that. And so I was really trying to figure out for a long time, like, what the heck is going on.
Yeah.
Couple other quick stories, and then we can kind of do some more
Yeah.
back and forth.
Yeah.
So another big one, right? I will try to keep it PG and clean and nice and all of that. But so,
Sure.
I published my first book in 2018. It's called Get Out of Your Head. I remember going to work about a year later, and one of my colleagues is like, hey, I'm trying to find your book on Amazon, and I'm pretty sure this isn't your book, but I kind of feel like it is. And so I look at his computer screen, and I'm like, my heart just like drops. And he's like, that looks just like your book, and yet it's not. And so we open it, and basically, the details are Big Five publisher coming out with a book of the same name. The layout of the cover is very, very similar. The color palette is identical. The typography is the same. And I'm just like, you've got to be freaking kidding me.
Oh my
I
gosh.
poured my entire this is my life's work. I poured my freaking soul into this. And from my point of view, again, I'm trying to keep it PG and all that, but I'm like,
Sure.
from my point of view, I felt as though I was ripped off, right?
Yeah.
And I went through a battle with that publisher for a while, and also I got taken down off of Amazon because what ended up so I get taken down, and then I'm like, all right, I've had enough. I'm lawyering up. I'm going after these people. And that was another situation where you learn kind of the hard way sometimes that like the world does not
course.
work the way that you think it does or the way that you want it to, right? I'm like,
Yeah.
I got ripped off. I got kicked off of Amazon, sue these people, and I want a ton of money. And I'm working with my lawyer, and he's like, sorry, buddy, but like, that's not quite how it goes here.
Right.
But anyway, we inquire with Amazon, and they're like, look, during an internal review, this other book became a bestseller, and we felt as though you were impersonating this other book, this other person. And I'm like, you have got to be kidding me, dude. How about you look at the release dates of the product? That is absolutely insane,
Yeah.
So I went back and forth with my lawyer, and then we ended up going after the big publisher a little bit. And all I will really say, right, to kind of cap this one off is like, got to a point where like, they were like, look, we have way more resources than you. If you want to come after us, good luck. And it just really put a bad taste in my mouth. But also, right, like talking about all this stress, that was a massive, massive stressor where it's like, I put my heart and soul on the line, and how do I get
Yes.
rewarded for it? I get kicked off of Amazon. You know what I mean? Like
Yes.
that absolutely stinks. And so those kinds of things stacked up and stacked up and stacked up. And again, like you have to find a way to manage them, even if you're just like, I'm going to keep them at arm's length. Because if I
Right.
don't, I'm going to explode. But
Yeah.
at the same time, right, like really keeping it at arm's length versus actually processing it, like that energy is still stored up in your body and in your nervous system. And at some point, it
It's
becomes a
gonna go.
volcano where it blows over.
Yes, I totally gosh, you are so you're my people. You're talking about energy and all of that, and that's my game. I love it. So I completely agree with you when those things stack up. Okay, so during the season, are you in therapy? Are you trying to de-stress? Are you trying to do the things that you know to do?
So, yeah, I mean, like I'm sticking to my tactics, the things that I talk about in my book, right?
Mhm.
I'm also like exercising. I like to run. So, like, that was a way that I blew off steam and that kind of
That's
thing.
great.
Yeah. And I appreciate that. The challenge was like, I'm doing those things and yet I'm still not quite making the progress that I want to be making. And I will also say, right, like, no slight on this guy, but like, at some point during that season, I hired a therapist, nice
Mhm.
guy, but like, we just didn't get anywhere, like over
Yeah.
the course of a year. And
Mhm.
I think I kept going with it because he was in my insurance network. The copay was very small. And you're like, it's one of
Yeah.
those things where you're like, how could I let somebody go? Like I have a therapist who works with me, who I pay $20 a copay. Like most people can't find a therapist. So
Mm.
better to have a not that great a one
Not at all.
than none at all, And
Mhm.
so there was a certain point where and this is what like just out of transparency, right? Like
Yeah.
and people can try on these different ideas doesn't mean they're going to work for everybody or whatever, but so I follow Mark Manson. He's like one of my influences in terms of writing and all of that. I've followed him
Mhm.
for a long, long time. It's fascinating to see the journey that he's been on. Where like I was following him when he was a dating coach, and that's what I
Okay.
knew and loved him for. And now he's very much in general life advice and all of that.
Mm.
Anyway, so he puts out this app called Purpose, which is an AI app. And it's not therapy, but it's meant to be like a coach that helps you find purpose and meaning in your life and all of that. And so he released it, I think in like November of last year.
Mhm.
And I'm like, you know what? Let me give this a try. And I downloaded it and I was on it for like 4 hours straight because I'm like, this is insane. Like the revelations that I'm seeing here are wild. And again, this is where I would say to folks, exercise caution.
Sure.
But the program was like, yeah, we're talking about your therapist and he did what? And he said what? And he did this and he did that. Yeah, dude, fire him immediately. And I was like, okay, I think that's a little extreme. I don't want to do that just yet. I don't want to necessarily take the
Right.
advice of an AI app and be like, yeah, let me fire this human.
Right, right,
But
right.
I was like, let me sit on it for like a week. And
Mhm.
we just kept peeling back the onion. And I was like, even if I said in those first 4 hours, like we made more progress than I made in a year with my therapist. And so I was like, I'm going for it. Right. And I continue to use that tool. It is instrumental for me.
Yeah.
What I would say is like, I firmly believe in therapy. I love the idea of therapy.
Mhm.
I do also think, however, that finding a good therapist is very difficult.
Mhm.
Most therapists or therapy in general is inaccessible, as in, like, you have to work with somebody who is licensed in your state. Most therapists, right? The world is on fire. People are super stressed out. Most
Mhm.
therapists do not have any availability. If they
Right.
do have availability, they are probably not in your network, and therefore you're paying out of pocket for every session. So it's just a very difficult thing
Mhm.
to get into and find success with. At the same time, if you do find, and this is why people say, if you find a good therapist, you never
Never.
let them go, ever.
Yes. Me, yes. I've had the same therapist for like 4 years. She's amazing. But I've had some really not great ones in the past as well. You actually decided to go a different route to see if there was anything else contributing to this anxious season that you're in. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, and just a little bit more of the preamble, just because it will make sense when we talk about what I did, right? So,
Sure.
in this season, not only am I having that anxiety that feels like it's not attached to anything, but the main thing was I'm having these really physical symptoms that were just completely harrowing,
Oh,
right?
yes.
So,
Yes.
I'm getting a ton of nerve pain, like shooting pains into my feet and into my hands. And I'm
Mhm.
thinking to myself, like, I am
Mhm.
dying. I'm completely dying. This does not make sense. And at the same time, I'd be getting this psychological symptom called derealization, which is basically like your brain kind of tunes out and makes it feel as though reality is not real. It is a very, very distressing thing to go through. I would say probably of everything, it might be the most distressing thing that I've ever experienced.
Mm.
There was a week last year where like I was in derealization for a solid week in a row. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, I know this is real, but my brain is just completely messed up right now and it doesn't feel real. And so again, I like kept going back to my doctor being like, I'm having all these symptoms. And like, I talk about nerve pain and derealization. There were many other ones too, on top of that, where it's like,
Right.
I kept thinking to myself, my body is going to collapse and I'm going to die, And so what I ended up doing to answer the sort of prompt that you had, right, Molly, was I'm like, there's something very physical going on. I need to figure it out. And so I paid for my own blood work. I actually was like, I'm glad that I did it, but I paid out of pocket for an MRI, like a full body MRI, because I'm like, my brain is going to explode. My nerves are going to explode. I have no idea what's going on. Just another funny story was if you try to order different services, right? Like if you can't get them through your doctor, and my doctor was like, no, I'm not getting you an MRI, and you pay out of pocket, you're limited to where you can do them. And so I went through Function Health because like you need a referral, right?
Sure.
Or at the very least, like you need to find a practice that's going to take cash near you. And so like I couldn't get a referral. So I went through Function Health, which is where I do my blood work. Very popular service these days and pretty affordable.
Yeah.
So they offer MRIs. The only problem is I live in Boston and the closest location is New York City. So I take a day off from work. I take the train to New York. I get in the MRI machine and I'm pretty nervous about it. And I really, really came this close to having a panic attack in the machine because it's very constrictive. Oh man, it's so claustrophobic. It's a very scary thing to go through if you don't like tight spaces. And I remember sitting there and be like, this is where I will toot my own horn for one quick second. And I'm like,
please do. Please do.
That was one of my biggest accomplishments. I'm in that machine. My heart is flying and I'm like, I'm going to freak out. And I'm going to hit the button. When you're in there, you have a button. And if you hit the button, it's the emergency stop button. And they're like, you can hit it, but like, if too much time has gone by, you will forfeit your appointment because we need an hour to do the full MRI. So if you're halfway through and you forfeit, like, that's it. So I'm like maybe like 7 minutes in and I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm so nervous. This is the scariest thing that I've done in a while. And I just talked myself out of it. I was like, listen, dude, you took the day off of work. You took a train to New York City. You paid $2,000 to sit in this friggin' machine. You paid for the train ticket. You are not getting out of this machine. And I just shut it, like I shut my body down and I got through it. And I was again, that I will give myself some kudos for that one. Cause I was like, I didn't think I could do that. I really
For
did.
sure. What did the MRI show?
MRI showed basically nothing. They were like, you're clean, which was awesome. That was
Cross it off the list.
Yeah. That was like the most joyous days of my life. It was like right before my birthday. I got the results and I was just so happy, like, cause I was so scared. I was like, something is gravely wrong in my body. And then at the time, like I had not actually like gotten blood work done. So I did blood work as part of like signing up for Function Health and all of that. And I remember being like, I don't know what the blood work's going to show. And I paid for extra tests and all that. Blood work came back, pretty clean. I was like, some deficiencies or cholesterol a little high or whatever, but nothing like life threatening. And I'm like, okay, so we'll cross that one off. And I remember just thinking to myself, like, okay, I tell myself that I eat pretty healthy at the time. And at that time I was like pretty close to vegan vegetarian, thinking that it was very healthy. And then like, I guess I just started investigating more and more. And like, as this is all going on, I'm like, okay, I need to rebuild everything. Cause I'm like, if my brain and my body are not cooperating, then I must be doing a lot of things that are not working. And so I essentially rebuilt my diet. I downloaded this app called Chronometer, which I would really recommend to folks.
I use it.
Awesome.
I love it. Yeah.
It's amazing, right? You put your foods in there. It tells you like how much of each vitamin and mineral you've gotten on a daily basis. Also your macros, fiber, stuff like that. So it's huge. And I like started using it. And as you do, right, you kind of notice that you eat in patterns and those patterns lead to certain deficiencies over time. And then you're like, okay, well, that tells me that I need to supplement with XYZ or whatever. So I'm making all these improvements, and yet I still wasn't really getting the juice, if you will, right?
Mm-hmm.
So fast forward, I keep doing more tests. I did a genetics test because I'm like, I just don't know. Like, what is this a genetic disease? What's going on? Is this a
Mm-hmm.
neurological disease? And the first time that I finally felt like I got some traction or a little bit of good signal was I actually did. And I know folks that are listening are probably like, man, dude, like, did you need to do this many tests? But like, hey, when you're desperate, right? So I did
Mm-hmm.
a mitochondrial test, which for folks who are not familiar, right? You go into your cell, like if you think about the anatomy of your cells, the mitochondria is known as the powerhouse. It's, the thing that creates and distributes the energy. The thought with this testing is that if your mitochondria are not healthy, then you have an energy bottleneck or an issue with energy creation and distribution in your body. And therefore, downstream of that, all sorts of things that are negative are going to happen, right? Whether that's
Yeah.
neurological, psychological, physical, muscle twitches, whatever, it's
Right.
all downstream of that. So I get my results back. And the thing was like, you have a pretty big bottleneck in these couple of places. And so,
Mm.
they give you a big report and they're like, here's what we want you to try. And they specifically said, in my case, we think that you have an overload of a specific mineral. And so
Okay.
I essentially went on like this very strict diet. So, like it said, you have an overload of manganese. And as I
Okay.
thought about it, I'm like, it could make sense because I looked into the science a little bit. And what I found, which I am not a scientist, so do not take this as gospel, but
Sure.
what I found was iron and manganese compete for uptake in the cells. And so if you have too much manganese, then you may get enough iron like in your diet for a regular person, but you may not get uptake. And therefore you may have a functional deficiency of iron. And so I
Yeah.
thought to myself, I'm like, I have never eaten red meat. I've probably had like 2 hamburgers in my life and like maybe one steak. We just didn't eat it growing up.
Okay.
And being a vegetarian, right? What do they often say? Like the risks are B12 and iron. And
Yeah.
I did take B vitamins, which I don't know, that might have contributed to some of the problems because if you get too many of them, that might not be good either. But I'm like, I didn't necessarily supplement with the iron, maybe for a brief period or whatever. But I'm like, this could make sense, possibly, if
Mm-hmm.
you say a vegetarian or a vegan diet is typically pretty heavy in manganese
Okay.
and low in iron, especially like the kind of iron that your cells can actually absorb, right?
Can use. Yeah.
Exactly. So back to chronometer, I'm looking at my stats and I'm like, well, at least the narrative does add up. Where when I say, hey, this guy's telling me I have an overload of manganese, and I look back at all my journal entries on chronometer every day, and I get 600% of my daily value of manganese, that's probably not great.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, I ended up getting on this diet that was very restrictive, which was basically like cut out most or all foods that contain high levels of manganese and then try to get more iron. And I guess what I would say is like, Molly, you and I talked about this before, was I changed so many things at the same time that it
Mm-hmm.
is hard to pinpoint which one of them was like the most impactful. But I do know that like right before I changed the diet, I went out to dinner with my friend. I had just been through close to a week's long episode of derealization, and I was beside myself. And I'm like, this stinks.
Yeah.
I've tried so many things and yet like nothing is really sticking. And he was like, all right, dude, let's look at the report. Cause he was the one who told me about this mitochondria test. And he's like,
Mm-hmm.
let's look at the report. And he's like, dude, try the manganese thing, go on the diet, see what happens. And I will definitely say that the instances of derealization went down dramatically after that.
Mm-hmm.
If they didn't disappear altogether, then they shrunk quite a bit. Where before that, it was like I'd have episodes that were like weeks long. And
Yeah.
now it's like, yeah, occasionally I do feel that way, but I can manage it better. And so
Mm-hmm.
my whole, like, the way that I would sum all of this up is like, I think that the changes that I made on the physical level allowed my body to handle stress better. And at the same time, I have also been methodical about managing my own stress. And I think the combination of those two things has put less of a load onto my nervous system and therefore produced fewer symptoms overall.
Yeah. So we're talking about a physiological shift is impacting your psychological well-being. Because first of all, it's all connected, number one. But to your point, you did multiple things. So you did all of your strategies and tactics and then added this in and really saw a shift for you in anxiety. This is really so cool. And it really is a testament to one, functional medicine. Huge fan of functional medicine. I have a functional medicine doctor and have had one for several years. Will always work with her. She's amazing because looking at in the physiology, whether it's the cells or like for me, it's the thyroid but looking at how it impacts everything. So you can't just look at one specific thing and treat that thing. You got to look at it in totality. So I think that your experience is really fascinating. And I think if you're listening and you have struggled with anxiety and some of the same things that you've worked in that have helped you in the past are not as effective, then it's worth taking a look and seeing, is there anything physiological going on that's contributing to the anxiety or the depression or the OCD or whatever it is that you're struggling with in the moment. So fascinating, Brian. So you spent years being the guy with the playbook in mind. What did it do for you to realize that the missing piece was physiological and not just psychological?
If I may, I would just reframe it a little bit and say that like
Please.
the missing piece, like there was a large part that was physiological. There was also a large part that was psychological, right?
Sure.
That was just fascinating to me because, I'm the anxiety guy. I'm somebody who's written about mental health. And I think that, there's some analogy that's going on in my head, but it's like to the guy with a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and the idea just
Yes.
being that when you come at mental health from a lens of like all psychology, you overlook some of those other things. So for me, it was very enlightening to see, hey, there are like I've always subscribed to a holistic approach, but I usually meant that in terms of like holistic psychology, not necessarily like every single area of your life, including every morsel of food that you put into your body.
Yes, totally agree. Totally agree. Okay. For somebody who is listening, who has done the work, they've read the books, they're doing the therapy, and still doesn't feel like they're making progress, what do you want them to know?
Oh, two things. And the first one, I don't want to sound as though it is dismissive or anything like that. But
Mm,
just speaking from my own personal experience, right? Like I felt as though I had tried a lot of things. And especially in this new season, I'm like, again, feeling like a fraud, being like, I wrote a book about anxiety 10 years ago. What the heck? The advice that I would have there is to go deeper. And I don't mean that to be woo woo or anything like that.
mhm,
Like, I think about the amount of therapy that I did, both with the practitioner and then also through this AI app that I was talking about.
mhm.
And then also like actual conversations that I've had with people in my life.
Yeah.
And to look at that now, like, it was interesting to me because I'm sitting there thinking like, hey, I wrote the book and I have it all figured out. But when I look back, I'm like, again, sort of like looking at the anxiety book and being like, I sort of managed the anticipatory anxiety, specific anxiety. I had that specific thing in its rightful place. I did not, when I look back, necessarily have the breadth that I was really looking for. And so when
Mm,
I went deeper, both on the physical side of doing the testing, but then also the psychological side, it was fascinating, the things that came up. And
yeah.
that could be a whole nother podcast, right? But like,
Yeah.
again, you kind of like, you learn to like manage everything in your life where you're like, this is not a problem. That's not a problem. And sure, like, yeah, you still have your struggles, but like,
Yes.
you learn to just like live in the chaos and be like, this is fine. And then when you actually look at it, you're like, oh my goodness, I do that thing. I've
Yeah.
been doing that thing my whole life. That's what's holding me back.
Mm.
That is absolutely completely mind blowing because what ends up happening is you become that fish who looks around and is like, holy
Oh,
crap, this
right.
is water.
Right. Yeah.
So I would say go deeper.
Go
Um,
deeper.
the second part is just, words of hope and solidarity and support and all of that is like, regardless of how you felt about that answer, know that like, I understand it's a very difficult battle. You've tried a lot of things. My heart goes out to you. Like, I don't sit here in my ivory tower and say, hey, I've figured it out. Like, I know that there's going to be bad days ahead. At the same time, right? Like, I know that people who are listening can get through those days and find those things that work for them. And so there are also hopefully good days ahead. I guess hold on to the hope of that.
Yes. Oh my gosh, Brian. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. Friends, if you are listening and somebody has come to mind, somebody in your life who has struggled with anxiety, depression, OCD, please consider sharing this episode with them. You might help them uncover what their next best step is out of the funk of dealing with mental illness. So please consider sharing it. And of course, please consider rate, reviewing, and subscribing. It's the highest honor that you can give to somebody who has a show like this. And it also helps me in reaching 1 million people and helping them pivot out of the funk. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll see you next time.